Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on the CRC. My name's Janet Wood. I'm the editor of New Power magazine, and I'll be your chair for the afternoon. We've got 3 speakers to hear from, and we'll hear from all of them first. They should each speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for your questions about anything or anything around the scheme that you'd like to have clarified. You can ask a question at any time. If you look at the bottom of your screens, you'll see a quote or a red icon, which will turn into quotes. So if at any time you have a question, just complete that box and pass it to us, and we'll get to that at the end of all of the presentations. We'll move straight on to the first presentation. We had hoped to have Lindsay Govtoday, Head of CRC Energy Scheme at DEC. Unfortunately, he can't be with us, but he sent us an excellent stand-in the form of Donald Sposon, who's Senior Policy Advisor on the CRC scheme, also at DEC. So, Donald, thanks very much for stepping in at the last minute, and I know you've got a lot of information to get through, so I'll pass on to you straight away.
Okay, thanks, everybody. As I say, I've taken over to talk about the CRC scheme, and just to set the scene, we've got a few quotes there from people who are saying that energy efficiency and decarbonisation and growth aren't in competition with each other, but they're all part of the same thing, and they need to go hand in hand with one another. Possibly some of you will recognise some of the quotes, particularly from the PM. One of the first things he said when he came to DEC, that he wanted to be part of the greenest government. I'll leave you to judge that. The next slide basically gives you an idea of what DEC believes can be the level of savings through socially cost-effective investment in energy efficiency that could be achieved between now and 2020, and all those bright colours below the line are showing the depths of savings, and those above which aren't the savings, and we think we can be saving something to the equivalent of 22 power stations through cost-effective investment in energy efficiency. I hope some of you have been able to have a look at this document that DEC published recently about its purpose and how it's going to take forward the UK's energy efficiency potential. Rather interestingly, the next slide, which shows you the various scenarios on energy efficiency that we think will contribute a reduction in energy consumption between 2011 and 2050, you'll see that we believe the policies that we have in track for energy efficiency and the various schemes do keep us on track to 2020, but the amount of energy consumption after that date and the package that we have means that we won't be on track after 2020, and we certainly need to be doing something to maintain the progress after 2020. So that just gives you some idea of the challenge that we all face when it comes to decarbonisation and energy efficiency. The next slide really just illustrates the broad policy landscape that we're all operating in, and the various schemes operating in the public, in the business and the domestic sectors. I'm sure all those who are online will be able to place themselves against one or more of those schemes. So the challenge there is to ensure that policies complement each other and that we communicate them effectively to all participants. each of our energy policies, energy efficiency policies, they do have different primary targets, and again you can see that the CRC is for the less energy intensive commercial and public sector organisations, and the ETS and the CCA are for those energy intensive organisations, and ESOS covering all the large and smaller SME enterprises. So we're trying to target different sectors when it comes to energy efficiency in the schemes that the government has in place. But we also recognise that if one organisation can be in one or more of the schemes, and this slide seeks to illustrate that. So you can be reporting under a number of schemes, and that can cause a bit of frustration with some participants, and hope where they wish things to be simplified even more. So let's just go on to what the CR scheme is all about in some further detail. It came out of recommendations from a carbon trust report saying there was a gap in policy where the ETS and the CCA didn't cover, and they thought there needed to be an energy efficiency scheme that dealt with the less intensive, energy intensive organisations, and that's where, from the Carbon Trust report, that the first beginnings of the CRC came into effect, and the government accepted all those barriers that are put into the slide here that needed to be addressed. So the scheme came into play into force in 2010, and it seeks to, and the qualification is for those who use 6,000 megawatt hours of electricity in a year, not seeking to cover ETS and CCA organisations. And at the moment, for phase one, there was over 2,000 participants in the public and private sectors. There's slightly less for phase two, and all those who are participating in the scheme will account for 10% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. So you have a list, on the side of the slide here of the organisations which are captured by the CRC. This slide just lists quickly how the system works. Organisations have to report their energy supplies annually to the Environment Agency, and for each tonne of CO2, then they have to pay for each tonne, and for phase two, that's going to average at £16 of tonnes of CO2. And each year within the annual report publication, participants' progress is reported. The CRC wasn't much loved when it was first published, first came into effect. It was considered too complex and difficult. So there was a request, particularly with the new government in 2010, that we would seek to simplify the scheme. And this slide here just sets out the sort of journey that we took over the period between 2010 and 2014 to simplify the scheme. I'm sure lots of you were involved in the consultation processes. So simplification has come to an end, and the next slide just lists some of the... Hello, I've got an error on my screen now. It's not showing the next slide. Can you help me? Hello?
Donald, it's Janet Wood here. I've moved the slide on, and we're on the simplification of CRC slide, if that's correct.
Yeah, but it's not up on my screen. Hold on. Yeah, so the next slide shows you the simplifications we made to the scheme, what we believe the amount of reductions in admin costs were, the reduction in the number of fuels from 29 to 2, the allowance surrender deadline extension and greater flexibility to disaggregate your organisation, and a reduced overlap with other schemes. Next slide, please. Phase 1 ended of CRC ended on the 31st of March this year, and we're now in the process of undertaking an evaluation of how effective the CR scheme has been. And at the moment, our consultants are undertaking a number of interviews with participants and non-participants, and the final report on the evaluation of the CRC will be published in the spring of next year, and that will then feed in to the review of the CRC that the Chancellor announced a year or so back to take place in 2016. Next slide, please. A slide really trying to help us to understand the heating challenge and how it relates to the whole of the energy system. A bit of a confused, in one way, slide, but I hope it gives some idea of the challenges of understanding energy efficiency and how we need to process it and make it more efficient. Next slide, please. This slide is showing that there is a difference between how heat demand is very different from electricity demand. Heat has a much greater demand over the seasons and over the course of the days, and that can be very different from overall electricity demand. And next slide, please. Renewable heating will also obviously play an important part in our energy efficiency targets, and we have an EU target that we must proceed with on renewable energy of 15% by 2020, so that will be part of the rollout of policies. Next slide, please. And I presume many of you would have already seen the publication of the two documents mentioned there, the Strategic Framework for Low Carbon Heat in the UK and Meeting the Challenge of the Future of Heating. I think that's the end of my presentation, I think. Yes?
Yes, thanks very much, Donald, and thanks for stepping in at the last minute to pick up on that. I think we'll hold questions until we've heard our other two presentations, although we do have some questions coming in, and webinar attendees, you can send questions at any time by using the button at the bottom of your console. It's a red button, and as you hover over it, you will see quotes appear. Now we'll move on to our second speaker, and that is Samantha Spivey, who is a senior advisor at the Environment Agency. Samantha, take it away.
Hi, yes. Hi, everybody on the call. So I work for the Environment Agency. So as Donald touched on his presentation, we go through sort of a yearly compliance cycle. So my presentation is more about how we administer and regulate the scheme and some of the things we're doing with participants in terms of delivering DEX policy. So if I just move on to my first slide. Okay, so as the Environment Agency, we are the UK scheme administrator, so there's some functions that we deliver on behalf of the whole of the UK. And one of those is running the CRC registry, which is the IT system under which participants submit or carry out their obligations. And we also administer the sale and surrender of allowances on behalf of the UK. In addition to that, we are the regulator for England, and the subtlety between being an administrator and a regulator is our responsibility as a regulator is to audit English participants and, where required, take enforcement action. We have partner regulators across the UK in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales that undertake the same roles as a regulator. In addition, what sometimes perhaps people, the general public, don't realise is that we're also a participant in the scheme. So we've got a team that works down in Bristol who are actually involved in CRC, like perhaps many of you yourselves are. As a participant, we're quite a large participant. We're around, we're in the top 300, so we're sort of top 20% in terms of size. And our annual emissions are around 35,000 tonnes of CO2 a year. Just a bit of background to ourselves and our role. So this diagram here, you may have seen before. This is taken as an extract from our guidance manual, and we've talked about that the CRC is an annual cycle. Throughout a year, participants are required to monitor their emissions, and then at the end of the year submit an annual report to ourselves, which breaks down the different emissions. And finally, as participants, you need to surrender allowances equivalent to your yearly emissions. And what as CRC has evolved and matured, we've recently moved into a two-phased approach in terms of allowances. So at the beginning of a compliance year, there is a government sale in which participants can purchase allowances, and they're at a lower rate because of the policy is to try and drive a clear forecasting of energy, and doing that correctly will save organisations money because they will buy the right amount of allowances at the beginning of the year. Mindful that not everybody is able to do that, or people may choose not to do that at the end of a compliance year. There is another government sale in which participants can buy any additional allowances that they need at an elevated price. There is also a trading option in CRC, which hopefully will increase as the CRC matures, and that's where, so for example, a participant may have purchased more allowances than they were required in the government sale. They have an opportunity to trade them with other participants who don't have enough allowances. And we have seen a couple of, a few trades going on, but the market hasn't, it's not a particularly extensively used facility at the moment. So that's sort of a summary of the compliance cycle for the year. I'm going to talk, give you some figures on how skipping to the wrong, sorry about that. Okay, so hopefully you can all see a slide now that said how is compliance. So this year we moved into phase 2 of CRC, and we now have about 1,900 UK participants in the scheme, and of those, over 95% of participants registered on time. And I haven't said how many participants have come in since, because I guess it's a little bit of an open book. We don't know definitively absolutely everybody that should be in the scheme. It's a self-certification scheme, but we are doing work to identify potential organisations that should have registered for phase 2 and perhaps haven't. So of the people that we know about, the vast majority, say over 95%, met their compliance obligations in terms of registration. And I will come on to sort of what we're doing to try and enable and identify organisations captured by CRC in my next slide. In terms of reporting, again, we've had really good high compliance rates from organisations in terms of this. So 94% of our participants submitted their annual report on time, and now we've got over 99% of participants that we expect to submit a report have done so. And again, I think out of the less than 1%, we sort of engage with, which I'll come on to a little bit more, work with organisations, sort of engage with them, really understand, are they meeting their compliance requirements? Has something happened which means that they no longer need to be in the scheme? Has there been an oversight, and how do we manage that? The surrender of allowances, last year, again, we had over 95% of participants surrendered enough allowances to meet their surrender commitment. So that was great. But it's likely to be less this year, and there are a couple of reasons for that, which I will come on to in my next slide. But we do have the mechanism that where we can open what's called a special allocation window. So participants who haven't got enough allowances to meet their surrender commitment, they do get a second shot at doing that, and that will be coming up later in the year. I think one of the biggest successes, well, not taking away that it is really good, that for the sort of time-driven deadlines, we have really strong and high compliance with participants, which is great. This sort of continuous monitoring of emissions, we have a duty to audit our participants, and to date we've audited around 20%. And one of a clear example is that participants are getting better at managing CRC, becoming much more aware of their energy supply and usage. In the first year of CRC, of the audits we did, about 83% of audits had participants had some errors in their monitoring and reporting. This has now fallen to about 33%, so a massive increase. There are a number of reasons why this may be the case. The scheme has matured, organisations have become more aware, simplification from DEC has taken away some of the burden, but it's a really good message, and sort of the way that we like to see sort of the shows embedding of the policy and delivery in CRC. So how do we encourage compliance? Well, we sort of have a three-step approach across the business. So we start by trying to educate our participants, and our customers, so that they know up front what they need to do. So we have written guidance. Over the course of the years that CRC has been in place, we've sort of sought to improve our guidance and communication documents. When we first started, we've had about, I think it was something like 13 different guidance documents. That has all now been consolidated into one written guidance manual. Conscious that people had to use a new IT system, we've developed presentations that take people through, like screenshot guidance, so participants are aware of what questions they will be asked as they're submitting their annual reports or placing allowances orders. We have a help desk, both telephone and email, and again over the years we've sought to refine that, make it more targeted, run training internally to ensure that we're giving clear and consistent advice. And we also have a regular community email service, so participants and interested parties are kept up to date with any changes, reminders of any deadlines on a regular occurrence. Having said that, obviously, sometimes things aren't necessarily always clear, or there's a lot going on. And so what we try to do is enable participants to have the best chance at being compliant. So a couple of ways that we do that is we try and identify risks where we think that they might be non-compliant, and where that happens, engage with participants. So for example, I touched on that we're doing work to identify organisations that should be in CRC and perhaps are not, and we're using the half-hourly meter database for that. So we're sort of taking that database and extrapolating that potential organisations that we would have expected to register and not, and contacting those organisations. Likewise, when everybody submits their annual reports at the end of the compliance year, we undertake some outlier checks to identify anything that might strike us as unusual. So, for example, an organisation might have reported 50,000 tonnes in one year, and the following year reports 500,000 tonnes. So we try to sort of identify where there might be some administrative errors, and in doing that, we will contact participants and give them the opportunity to go back in and update their annual reports if indeed there has been a mistake. I believe that this year we contacted around 200 organisations, and there have been a number of updated reports submitted as a result. And again, likewise, once the annual report is submitted and the allowance ordering window is closed, we can then do reconciliation to identify organisations that we believe are unlikely to be able to meet their surrender commitments. And again, contact organisations to ensure that they're aware of that, and try and give them advice on guidance on what steps they can take to be in the best possible position to facilitate compliance. And then finally, it is a piece of legislation. We do have a civil penalty regime. We've got a number of enforcement options that we can take where we deem it appropriate. We have an enforcement notice where we can bring people into the scheme where people have been non-compliant, but we believe we don't always take enforcement action. We may issue a warning to sort of say we'll sort of acknowledge that this might be a first-time offence. We won't continue, we won't pursue it any further this time, but be mindful of it in the future. And then as a last resort, we also have civil penalties, which we have used in the scheme. As the scheme has matured, we have a policy where, like in year one of phase one, we were much more sort of sensitive about educating and enabling participants, but as the scheme matures, so will our enforcement response as well. And then my final slide is around what we want to do as a business in the future to continue, delivering this policy well for government and for our participants. And doing that will be, we've moved to Gov.uk this year. We will continue to work to improve our web pages and guidance to participants. We will continue with our audits and feedback to participants on the outcome of those. We have our help desk and customer feedback. So previously, we used to do a customer survey once per year, whereas now you'll notice, any of you who have sent emails into the help desk query, there is an opportunity for you to provide customer feedback continuously, and there's a link at the bottom of all of our help desk responses. I touched on enforcement just on the previous slide. Earlier on this year, we consulted on the Environment Agency's enforcement and sanctions guidance. This is due to be published before the end of this calendar year, and in that it's highlight our approach to enforcement for all of the different civil penalties across all of our climate change regimes, as part of sort of being a better regulator, open and transparent about our approach to enforcement. So I would encourage you to look at that once published, and we'll be informing participants when that is live on our website. And then finally, I've sort of focused very much on what we do in the Environment Agency. Conscious that it is a UK scheme, we work really well and quite closely with our partner regulators in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales to ensure that we're delivering the scheme fairly and consistently across the UK. And that is it from me. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Sam, for that very comprehensive information. Just one point that is probably worth clarifying at this point. You mentioned that you had partner organisations in Scotland and in Wales and Northern Ireland. Could you just let us know who those organisations are?
Yeah, so in Scotland it's the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. In Northern Ireland it's the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. And in Wales it's National Resources Wales. Natural Resource Wales, sorry, I said national, I meant natural.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Sam. By the way, it's worth letting webinar attendees know that they'll be able to access these slides. I believe they will be available for some time after the webinar finishes, and you'll receive instructions on how to access them. But now we can just move on to our final speaker for the afternoon. And that is Anthony Morgan, who's Chief Executive of New Form Energy, who I believe are helping companies to deliver some of these carbon reductions, these CRC commitments.
Hello, hi. Well, hello everybody who's listening to me. Yes, so my name is Anthony Morgan. Thank you for the introduction. And effectively, what New Form Energy do is look at hybridized energy solutions and how to maximize the carbon displacement by the integration of different bits of kit together, basically. We have specialized really on taking different technologies and putting them together, and I'll come on to a slide in a minute which demonstrates sort of why we do that and the efficiency gains that can be gained from that. But part of what we do is also go into organisations and audit the organisation to understand the baseline of where their carbon is at the moment, and then we'll offer advice on a range of solutions to maximise carbon reduction, starting on low cost and no cost items, and then looking at on-site generation as a second step of that process. As a business, we are more interested in that second stage, which is the on-site generation. So we start the process with once we have an understanding of the baseline energy requirements for using half-hourly data from the electrical requirements and the thermal requirements of a building. We put that data into our modelling software, and we then model different energy scenarios. So we'll use different technologies, put them against it to see how we can maximise the carbon displacement or the energy displacement within that building. Once we have an understanding of how that's what is required and how we can maximise that, we then basically put a kit of parts together, deploy it to site, install it. We then evaluate the solution to see how much is actually performed against our model, and from that we can then improve our processes and also then design new technologies. As an organisation, we've actually invested over £3 million into research and development over the last 6 years, and we've actually come up with a whole range of our own in-house designed technologies, which are obviously sort of UK-based technologies. It's through that sort of innovation that we keep our competitive edge. and it's also through that innovation that keeps us ahead of the market. We've actually been partnering with the likes of Panasonic and British Gas on the delivery of these systems, and we have track record in sort of maximising on carbon saving. So this slide is the slide I mentioned just previously. Really, this underpins everything that we do as a business. So it's understanding the relationships between different technologies and how, by combining them together, you can improve overall efficiency. If you look at the graph on the right-hand side of the screen, that is actually a graph for a series of different types of solar thermal collectors. And what you'll notice is that the lines sort of reduce, and basically the bottom part of the graph is the point at which stagnation is reached within the solar thermal collector. So that is the temperature, the maximum operating temperature of a collector. On the other axis, what you can see is the amount of kilowatts available under standard test conditions. So under a 25 degrees centigrade, 1,000 watts of radiance, if your fluid temperature and your ambient temperature are exactly the same, you are displacing the maximum, or you're absorbing the maximum amount of energy. As your fluid temperature climbs, then the amount of energy you're able to absorb then drops off. And for the white line, that's an evacuated tube, which stagnates at about 220 degrees centigrade and will convert about 55% of sunlight into useful energy. The yellow line is for a standard flat plate collector, and actually if your stagnation temperature on a flat plate collector is around about 160 to 180 degrees centigrade, but you're able to, under ideal conditions, absorb about 72 to 75% of the sunlight. And finally, the black line is actually an unglazed collector, the sort of thing you'd get on a swimming pool. Stagnates probably about 20 degrees above ambient, but under perfect conditions, if your fluid temperature and your ambient temperature are the same, you're actually able to convert about 80 to 83% of sunlight into useful energy. And the message here is actually that keeping solar thermal panels cool enables you to generate more energy, which is the same really applies to photovoltaics. And the graph on the left is showing you the same thing for a range of different types of photovoltaics. And I won't go into the detail, but irrespective if it's a monocrystalline, polycrystalline, amorphous silicon, they all follow the same sort of trend. And the interesting thing here is that at around about 65 degrees centigrade, the amount of available or the amount of energy that's able to be absorbed by a photovoltaic collector drops to about 6%. So it's the importance of keeping panels cool and allowing airflow around panels is clearly demonstrated. Now, what we do is actually we combine those two together. So what we're doing is taking the waste heat away from the panel. We have a technology called PVT, which we introduced into the UK, that takes that waste heat to be used elsewhere for other processes or for space heating within the building. And because we've taken that waste heat away, we're able to increase the performance of both the PV and the solar thermal. And the bottom graph is a similar graph for heat pumps. And what this shows is actually that heat pumps work in the opposite way. So as you drive temperatures down, the efficiency of the heat pump goes up. So if you combine the heat pump into that system, where you're mechanically cooling the panels on your roof, or indeed putting the energy from the panels on the roof into the ground, maintaining a lower temperature, you're able to displace far more carbon. You can retrieve that energy at a higher source temperature, which means that your heat pump is then running more efficiently. So it's a really nice synergy of systems, and it's a very good demonstrator of what we do really as a business and the sort of development that we undertake. My next slide is outlining actually where CRC fits within the feed-in tariff scheme, and you can't actually it's considered double counting if you were to be able to obtain feed-in tariffs and the CRC benefit. So although you can't get the feed-in tariff alongside the CRC scheme, I just wanted to be completely clear that in terms of the carbon benefit, it is still there because you're displacing energy that would otherwise be used on site. So because you're reducing the amount of energy that's being bought from the grid, that reduction in energy is compliant with CRC. So, and yeah, it's generally that you can still get all the other benefits that would come alongside electrical generation technologies alongside CRC. So these are two technologies which we've introduced, PVT technologies, which we've introduced into the UK market. The panel on the left is what we call a power therm panel, and it's more akin to a solar thermal collector, but the same footprint also produces electricity. That collector actually runs at a higher stagnation temperature, so the electrical yield is compromised. But you get quite a useful amount of hot water because it runs at a higher temperature. Oh, excuse me, so I just gone on too fast there. Bear with me. Let's slide back up again. Oh. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. And the panel on the right is a power volt collector, and the power volt is slightly different in terms of the fact that it has a much lower stagnation temperature. It's far more akin to an unglazed collector. It stagnates typically at about 75 degrees centigrade. But what you're doing here is basically taking the heat away from the collector in order to increase the electrical efficiency. These panels have been independently tested, and we can show that over the course of a 12-month period, a passively cooled PVT collector will increase the electrical yield by up to 16 to 20%. So then that waste heat, as I said before, can then be used for other processes within the building. I've sort of focused a little bit on combined heat and power plants because essentially the systems that we produce are solar CHP. So the closest thing that we can reference them to is a standard combined heat and power plant. So I thought maybe if I illustrate the CHP technology and what that offers, go through a case study of the amount of carbon that can be displaced using a CHP system and the sorts of costs involved, and then go on to an equivalent hybridized energy systems, PVT energy system. It would give you a good indication of the differences between the two systems and the carbon benefit. So what is a CHP system? It's effectively a gas generator that produces electricity by burning gas, and the waste heat from that process is then used within the building. They are generally sort of far more efficient in terms of energy saving and carbon saving than a standard boiler, and because you're burning gas to produce electricity, the electricity that is produced is at a cheaper price than conventional electricity. Estimated energy savings from a typical CHP plant are about 10%. So, but on-site data would show this is generally higher than this. Cost savings in overall energy sourced from the grid is between 15 and 40%, depending on how much you're paying and how much you're using. And typically, they're looking at an on-site carbon reduction of about 10% over standard energy forms. So the next slide is showing you, it's actually a case study of Queen's Tennis Club in London, where they've installed a CHP plant. So the CHP plant cost £105,000 to install. That was £27,000 for the cylinders, and the rest of it was obviously the plant itself. The annual reduction in energy cost was £45,000. Maintenance cost, a silver plan, which is basically everything but the replacement of the kit, was costing £6,000 per year. And the financial benefit to the customer was £39,500 per year. So it's that £105,000 was giving a payback period of 2.7 years. It's a 37.7% return on investment. I mean, although it's a fairly high capital cost, you can see how attractive these sorts of systems are. And the carbon saving per year on that particular installation was 171, nearly 172 tonnes. So we undertook an audit of a large leisure centre, and we were looking at basically using a CHP plant against a hybridised energy plant, so using a PVT heat pump scenario. So, but we were also looking at on-site voltage optimization, LED lighting, basically saver controls, so optimization of control systems on site, timer switches and that kind of stuff. And we actually managed to get to a 61% carbon saving with a combined approach to all of these technologies. Now, if you were to have installed everything together, the total installation cost would have been, for this particular application, would have been 342,000. But the payback for that would have been 4.4 years. So that's a 22% return on investment. The combined heat and power plant directly against the PVT heat pump solution, there was £84,000 for the capital cost, with a 5.5 year payback. And for the PVT system, much higher capital cost for installation, but the payback, because of the incentives, was actually at 4.4 years. So again, depending upon the level of investment that you're able to apply to it, sometimes it makes more economic sense to go more expensive. You get a faster payback period and actually a better carbon saving. The next slide is showing you an actual installation that we have done on a swimming pool. And swimming pool systems are absolutely perfect. It's a sweet spot for the technology. And in this particular system, it was actually the installation cost for this was for a 30 kilowatt PVT system with an 80 kilowatt heat pump. It cost £175,000 to install, but it's a 4.8 year payback period. And it was nearly 70,000 kilograms of carbon displaced in a year. So not just the carbon displacement, but the energy saving for the leisure centre was quite substantial. Finally, my final case study is actually for a large retail store based in Ashford in Kent, which we've recently audited and looked at at maximising the carbon displacement. The energy consumption for the store is 583,000 kilowatt hours per annum. They're using 97,200 kilowatt hours of gas. The annual cost for the electricity is nearly £66,000 per year, and nearly £37,000 per year for gas. So £102,000 nearly £103,000 per year total energy usage. The emissions for the building is nearly 316 tonnes per year. That's 178 tonnes for gas and 315 for electricity, 178 for gas, and nearly 500 tonnes total. So our proposed solution, we were looking at a PVT solution with ground source heat pumps, 200 kilowatts of PVT, that's 200 kilowatts of electrical, that gives you nearly 800 kilowatts of thermal, 60 kilowatts of ground source heat pumps, 4 of them, 50 90-metre boreholes, The heat distribution system was a wet system via low temperature air handling units. Total estimated cost is 979,400. Annual outputs from the ground source heat pump was 902,000 kilowatt hours. PVT electrical generation is 237 kilowatt hours. And we're actually putting to ground nearly just over 500,000 kilowatt hours to the ground. Sorry, wait for my slide to come up. So the system, the income from that system for the ground source heat pump from the RHI was 41,340. The fit income 25,716. The averted electricity use on site was 80%, so 220,985 pounds saving. Averted gas 34,300 pounds. So total saving per annum was 128,158 pounds. And return, so the return on investment was 11.6%, with a payback of 8.6 years. And the carbon reduction was basically 160 tonnes. That's a 32% carbon reduction. We then took it a stage further to see if we could increase that carbon reduction with the application of on-site electrical generation. By adding 200 kilowatts of photovoltaics, which was an additional cost of £180,000, so that brought the total system cost to 1.15 million. But we were able to reduce carbon on site by nearly 500 tonnes, which is 52% reduction on carbon. So sorry, 275 tonnes reduction, which is 52% reduction. And a return on investment of 13.2% with a 7.6-year payback period. So you can see that actually in this particular instance that going the extra yard with the installation of the photovoltaics actually gave a better return on investment and a far better carbon saving. And that, I think, is my presentation. Thank you very much. Any questions? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me now?
I can, yep.
Oh, well, thanks very much, Anthony, for that presentation. It's clear that there's a lot of complex work to be done to really pull the best value out of the different options out there. We're going to move on to questions now, and I think the first one is one that's perhaps best directed to Sam. We've got a question from somebody who acquired property on the 1st of April 2013. When will they qualify for CRC? And I think perhaps that we might broaden that out a little bit to ask what happens in general as companies are growing and shrinking their portfolios. How do they manage that process within the CRC? Sam, is that something you can pick up?
Yeah, not a problem. Okay, so specifically around NHS, there are quite specific definitions about how NHS organisations are covered by CRC, and they are described in the Freedom of Information Act. And so I would encourage having a look at that. Each of the NHS organisations will have like a separate legal status and therefore would participate in CRC individually, providing that they met the qualification criteria. So for the purpose of answering this question, let's assume that the NHS Trust is a separate legal entity as defined in the Freedom of Information Act. What would have needed to have happened is qualification for phase 2 was actually ran from the 1st of April 2012 to the 31st of March 2013. So if during that year your organisation, or NHS Trust in this case, there's 2 qualification criteria. The first is that you as an organisation had a half-hourly meter settled on the half-hourly market, and the second is if you consumed more than 6,000 megawatt hours of electricity during that year, then you would have qualified for phase 2 of CRC and should have registered. So that's qualification. Bearing in mind now we're in 2014, the rules around as organisations change and move and merge or transfer can be quite complicated, and it depends on the structure of the organisation. There are different rules depending on the size that's moving, and it's basically around whether, if you are acquiring an organisation, whether that organisation would have been in CRC in its own right had it not formed part of your group, and there's special rules around that. If you are a participant in CRC and you just, for example, acquire an additional site, so not at an organisation or legal undertaking level, then you start accounting for those emissions from that site as and when you obtain it, just like if you were to lose a site. But as I said, it does vary depending on circumstances, whether you are a public or private sector, how your organisation is established, whether you're part of a franchise, whether you're part of landlord tenant, and whether you're part of a private equity fund. And so my advice, if there's any concern over your particular participant, I would first encourage you to go and look at our guidance, which is on Gov.uk. There are 2 different guidance documents that I will recommend. One around qualification, so that will sort of highlight again what the qualification criteria was, when it happened, how you would assess qualification. And then the second one is if you are a participant in CRC and you are sort of purchasing new sites or losing new sites or merging or reorganising your structure, then I would look at the CRC Phase 2 Compliance Manual, and within that it sort of gives you the general overview, but then there's annexes which focus specifically on different sort of group structures and organisation structure. And failing that, as I said, we have our help desk, so if you contact us and give us your specific details, we'll be able to work with you to give you clarity on that.
Thanks, Sam. Donald, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? That seems quite comprehensive to me.
That is a very comprehensive answer.
Right,
and I couldn't have done it better myself.
Okay, we've got a question for Anthony. One of our listeners is asking what proportion of the savings were for CRC in the case studies that Anthony was talking about. And I'd like to broaden that question out a little bit if I can, Anthony. How do you find amongst the clients that you talk to that they, how much attention are they giving to CRC in amongst the other issues they have to deal with in reducing carbon or improving energy efficiency? Obviously, you can speak about what CRC means in those case studies if you want, but I'd be interested to know what the kind of feedback you're getting on CRC from your clients.
Well, it's actually something that's you've noticed in probably the last 6 months, sort of really becoming more. I think people are more widely aware of it. So when you go into organisations at lower levels, even that they're aware of the CRC, whereas beforehand it was sort of a more of a top level thing. So if we're going into a site talking to the facilities manager or whoever it may be, they are sort of aware of the requirements. So. Yeah, I think that there is definitely a shift in awareness and also in the requirements. I mean, On obviously the smaller organisations, it's not so applicable to anyway. But the bigger organisations, I mean, at the moment we've got a number of companies which are approaching us looking to do full audits across the site, to at least understand where they are and how they can. They've been benchmarking for a period of time, and now they actually want to start sort of moving things forward. So yes, there is definitely a change in that.
Great. And we've had some interesting questions about the scope of the CRC and what can be expected from it, and also about its future, because it has had quite a lot of evolution in its short history so far. So I think I'd like to ask you all, actually, without prejudging what the review will come up with next year, and perhaps with just some thoughts on the kind of feedback you're getting so far, where you see the scheme moving in the future. And one direct question from one of our participants is asking how we can expect the energy providers, I think that is, to really get behind this, because they profit from energy for properties that are not energy efficient. Clearly, there's some work needed to do to get them behind the scheme as well. So where do you see it going in the future? And perhaps, Donald, since you haven't been faced with the question yet, so I can start with you on that one.
Yes. As I said in my presentation, a lot of feedback from participants is that the scheme hasn't been much loved, and they saw it as over bureaucratic and complex, and that's why we went through the simplification process. And at the simplification process, the government announced that it would review the scheme in 2016. But what's clear now from participants is that they want it to settle down. They don't want any more tinkering or changes with it. They just want it to carry on until the review occurs in 2016, and we'll see what comes out of that. So that's the sort of the immediate future of the scheme. But as I also mentioned in my presentation, we are going through an evaluation of the scheme to test how effective it has been. The report will be in next spring, and that will directly feed in to how the review in 2016 will go forward and will affect the future of the CRC. So I think as now, things will remain the same. We'll have to see what comes out at the other end of the 2016 review.
Okay, and Sam, you're a participant as well as the administrator for the scheme. Can I ask you what's on your wish list as a participant, perhaps for its future?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure. We keep our role as a participant as a regulator very different, and so I would be speaking on behalf of somebody in a role that I don't undertake. I think government have made good steps to simplify the scheme, and I think as a regulator, sort of similar feedback we've had from participants as well about sort of having a stable scheme will be beneficial, and I think we can sort of see the benefits of that already in terms of, like I say, with the people being, compliance levels increasing, help desk queries decreasing. That stability does help embed a policy and make it work. So I would just sort of echo Donald's sentiments there.
And Anthony, is that the message that you're getting from your clients as well? Please, let's have some stability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely essential right across the industry, to be honest with you. So, I mean, be it from a feed-in tariff point of view, RHI, CRC, I mean, the whole industry does need a period of stability to actually sort of to give people confidence and to bed it in.
Great. Well, let's hope that the change we see next year is pretty much no change, and everyone will have a chance to really get bedded in with the scheme and use it to improve their situation as regards carbon emissions. And unfortunately, we've run out of time there, and I'd like to really thank our speakers, Donald especially, who stepped in at the last minute, and Sam and Anthony for giving us such detailed presentations about the CRC. You'll have, all participants will receive details about how to get hold of the slides, and will be able to re-listen to the presentations for a short while, but all that information will come to you. So with that, I'm afraid I'll have to close this afternoon and just thank once again our speakers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.